Alright, so a few days ago we spoke about Operation Raccoon City and how you can maybe see the groundwork of that game being used to make a decent multiplayer game that is more action focused, and I did say in that video we'd be looking at the other side of the coin and looking at the more survival horror focused multiplayer. And I did say yes, there was an iconic game that people want to see remade that does follow that pattern, and of course I'm talking about Outbreak. Why wouldn't I be talking about Outbreak? This game is probably the best example of a Resident Evil game that could be multiplayer at the moment. Now don't get me wrong, I think Resident Evil 5 and to a degree Resident Evil 6, the multiplayer co-op mode it has is fantastic, and I'm sure if they remake 5, if they bring back the co-op it'll feel just as good. But I think if anyone was looking at any kind of direction a multiplayer game should go in, it would be Outbreak for sure, and I do want to talk about why that is today. So I think what made Outbreak so good as a multiplayer game is it was very kind of grounded. You know, you were playing just average people trying to get out of the city when the Outbreak first started, and they all follow different paths and different storylines, and it's interesting to get to know the characters, and then obviously having the option to play as those characters with your friends as well. That was a big thing at the time, and you know, again, it's a fairly older game, so it did follow a lot of the older mechanics. It had kind of camera angle perspectives. It still had some like classic movement. You know, it had like the limited inventory system across all the characters, and I think that is definitely what people want for a multiplayer game. Because unlike Resident Evil 5 and 6 and Operation Raccoon City, for example, it's a survival horror game. It's a classic feeling Resident Evil game, but with a option to play it online and play it with friends. And while back in the day on the PS2, the multiplayer was not exactly for everybody in terms of accessibility, they could definitely bring it back in some way nowadays, and people would go nuts for it. Whenever you see the discussion of a remake, whether it's Code Veronica or 5 or the original game again, or even before that when 4 was rumored to be happening, people always said, "Don't make those games, remake Outbreak." And every time they released a multiplayer game, way back when Umbrella Corps came out, and then when Resistance came out, and then Reverse came out, you would always see, "We don't want this, just remake Outbreak." And it makes you think, people have said it enough times, why hasn't it happened yet? And I think that Resistance was the closest we got to it, and I know that's probably not something that everyone agrees on, but it was a cooperative, competitive game, and I think it kind of did share elements from Outbreak. It was very small things like having characters that were made for the game, having them do different things, but obviously it had that PvP side where you had the one player that was trying to kill all of you. Outbreak didn't have that. It was a purely co-op experience, and I think that's a big thing that the franchise as a whole is missing. We have Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6, the action focused combat co-op games, and as good as they are to play with somebody, especially a friend I think dipping into a game like Outbreak is something that has very much been left behind, and I think they should definitely bring it back in some way. Whether it's through a remake of Outbreak, or a completely new game that's very similar to Outbreak, I'm not sure, but I think this type of game is definitely something we're missing, and other studios have done the same type of thing, and it's worked well for them, so I don't know why there hasn't been some type of Outbreak game come back, but there definitely should be. So now I've gone over my kind of initial thoughts on Outbreak and why I think it should come back and how it's like a missing kind of market for Resident Evil games. I do kind of want to go over what it was for newer players who may not have played it before or heard of it before. I'm sure people have heard of it, but I do kind of want to go into what it was and why it was such a big deal. Because yeah, it's an old game. So Outbreak was a PS2 exclusive. It came out, I think, in 2003, and it was exclusive to PlayStation 2, yeah, so it wasn't anything else. But the big thing was, it was the first kind of Resident Evil game to get a multiplayer function, and that worked basically through PlayStation 2's online features. I forgot exactly how it worked on PS2, it's been so long, but yeah, PS2 had online, and you could play with up to 4 people online who could play in one mission together. There was still a single player option, but you just have like 2 AI companions, I think, and yeah, 4 players in a game at once in this old school type of Resident Evil game was a big deal at the time. So you had multiple scenarios. I think there was about 8 characters you could play, and they all had different backgrounds. There was a news reporter woman, there was obviously this RPD officer. I completely forget their names, so I apologise for that, but they're pretty well known characters now, people do love them. And yeah, also this game had like a new mechanic called like a infection gauge or a zombie gauge or something stupid like that. And what it would do would limit the amount of time you could spend in a certain mission. It would go up over time, and it would kind of increase more quickly if you kind of like took damage or got hit and stuff like that. And it made it feel a bit more, it increased the stakes, especially if your teammates weren't as good and you had to kind of carry them basically, or the game would just end and you'd all fail. So that was the thing. And yeah, it was a very similar game to like the original 3. It had very big survival horror elements. We had to find items and limited ammo and stuff like that, and obviously you'd have to share it between your team. It was very fun. The game also got a sequel not long after called File 2. It wasn't technically a sequel, it was like a DLC. Obviously you couldn't really kind of push out digital DLC back in the day because it was PS2, there was no store, and yeah, it contained more levels that just didn't make it to the release of the first game. And same characters, same kind of system, all online, and again that was a big hit as well. I think some of the levels in the second one, I think people said they were a bit of a miss, but for the most part it was the same game. There was going to be another one, but apparently the sales for the second one didn't really do as well as I'd hoped, and they scrapped that. Yeah, originally it was on PS2. I think, well, they definitely have been. The servers have been shut down officially now. I think they went down everywhere but Japan, and then Japan followed later on. But I think there's ways to restore the game now and still play it online through some janky PC shenanigans, I'm sure. So there's still ways to play it if you haven't already, and I really recommend you to check it out if you can, because it's a very different feeling game to 5 and 6 for co-op, and it feels very old school as well. So I think if you have a friend and you're able to play the game, definitely give it a shot. So yeah, there's a rundown of the game and what it was for people who may not know. And yeah, to kind of sum up the video, I think, like I said in the start, this is a missed opportunity for modern day Capcom games, modern day Resident Evil games. They should have a very survival horror focused multiplayer game in the new generation of Resident Evil games. I think it would work really well. I don't know if they'll do a complete remake of Outbreak. I think that might be the path they take, but it would be cool to see like a new game in the style of Outbreak. But yeah, feel free to leave your comments down below. Did you play the game in its prime? Were you there when the game was active on PS2? Do you want to see a remake of Outbreak over other games? Or if not, do you want to see a game kind of similar to Outbreak return in the future? I'm always interested to see what you guys say in the comments, and I do try and reply to as much as possible. But yeah, thank you for coming by. Remember to leave a like on the video if you did enjoy, and subscribe for more Resident Evil content. I try and post most days and try and stream most weekends, so there's always something new going on the channel. As always guys, I'll catch you in the next one.